It's 4 o'clock in Radio Cairo. This is World of Info.
Here comes that man again. Something in the way
We're coming live from Studio 3.
makes me sorry.
And today is Manal Dekaria is on the control.
Stranger, you're a baby.
I am Dr. Amr Mabrouk.
I know.
And today we are having the great pleasure and honor to have with us His Excellency Ambassador Ulric, Shannon, the Ambassador of Canada in Cairo, a very seasoned diplomat who had a degree from McGill University, the famous McGill University in Montreal, in political science, and a master's degree in international law from Toronto, and an experience as a diplomat in different countries in the Middle East, like Istanbul, and in Palestine, and of course he also worked for some time in Pakistan, and he was the ambassador of Canada in Iraq, and currently he's ambassador in Egypt, and he served in Egypt in his very early life in diplomacy, which makes him a very fluent speaker of Arabic and Egyptian Arabic and Egyptian dialect. Really, sir, thank you very much for having the time to come to our program and to come to Maspiro. It's a great honor. Thank you, sir.
The honor is all mine, Dr. Amr.
It's a great pleasure to have you with us. We're going to start right away because Canada has a very special place in the hearts of Egyptians, because it's the place where a lot of Egyptians are living. So almost any of Egyptians, although we are almost now 108 million, but everybody can claim that he either knows an Egyptian who's living in Canada, or at least he has a relative living in Canada. So we are distant cousins, if we use the expression.
Absolutely.
So Canada is a country in the northern part of North America. Its 10 provinces and 3 territories extend from the Atlantic to the Pacific and northward into the Arctic Oceans, covering 9.98 million square kilometers, making it the world's second largest country by total area. Yet the estimated population is approaching only 37.8 millions. Is it the weather, geography, or politics which makes the population, in comparison to the huge distance and the huge place, lesser than we expect?
Thank you. Thank you so much for hosting me, Dr. Amr. So yeah, Canada's it's a big country area-wise, but it's not a big country population-wise, and that is very much because of the climate. So we have most of our population actually is concentrated in the 100 kilometers or so that are along the U.S. border, because that's the southernmost part of Canada. It's where you can actually grow crops. So historically, that's where the population concentrated, because that's where you could actually survive given the difficult climate.
So this is not, it's not politics, right?
It's not politics. It's not a choice. In fact, it's a challenge for us, because most of our population tends to concentrate in a small number of cities. So people know about Toronto, they know about Montreal, they know about Vancouver. Those end up being very populated, very concentrated cities. And most of the newcomers to Canada, the people who immigrate from different parts of the world, they tend to settle in those 3 cities, and frankly don't take advantage of the diversity of Canada. There's a lot of space. There are a lot of rural areas, smaller towns, which haven't developed as quickly as the major cities. So there's certainly potential for our population to develop much more aggressively. And in fact, many people in Canada talk about how we should aim to have a population of 100 million by the end of the current century. And we have space for that.
So this definitely is a very interesting thing, and I know that from my friends who are living in Canada and now Canadians by getting the nationality through hard work, is that they know the government, the Canadian government, is giving incentives for the people to live further away from the famous cities. If you get the chance to work in more or less, we don't want to call them remote areas, but the weather is not that friendly, especially in the north to the 100 miles or 100 kilometers, and so the government is trying hard to give incentives for the people, right?
I don't think it's so much that the government is trying to create incentives. I think the incentives are there naturally, because it's a lot less expensive to live in some of these communities than it is to live in the major cities, where there's a bit of a housing crisis right now. It's expensive to live in the major cities, and so I've for years I've been involved in promoting international education. When I was in Istanbul, for example, as consul general, the economy, trade was my most important file, and we were having a lot of success there promoting education among Turks in Canada. And my advice was always, think beyond just, McGill in Montreal or the University of Toronto or the University of British Columbia. Think about some of the smaller cities in Canada that have high quality education and where the cost of living is much lower.
Mm-hmm. So it's you brought the subject of the second question now, because I know that education in Canada is a very special education, and really makes Canada one of the best countries in the world as regards the quality of life. The education is one of that factors, and the prices in comparison to your great southern neighbor is lower in higher education, and it's very sophisticated universities that present a lot of really important source of education, knowledge, and perfection of the knowledge. And a lot of Egyptians have taken the chance of getting their higher studies from there. And also the fact that the government is giving more or less subsidizing the education for the higher education for Canadians. I mean, if you are not Canadian, you will pay maybe double or three times what the Canadians are paying for the university. How far is this statement true, and how it has affected in the product, which is the educated human being?
Yeah, I think what you've said is accurate. We have a long tradition of respect for free or subsidized education, and so most Canadians come up through the public system, public schools, and it's really only until university that you enter, in some cases, the private system. We've built, I think, a quality brand on education through our basic freedoms. Right, we have a very strong tradition of freedom of speech, of belief, and so our universities have always been free spaces, places where we encourage inquiry, where, frankly, social movements, arise on our university campuses because they enjoy, unlimited, freedom of thought and of expression. And also because we have a tradition of respect for diversity. We welcome people from around the world, and that means that we've really enriched our higher education system with a lot of top experts from around the world. They find Canada an attractive place to live and to work, and so we're able to attract talent from all over the world. Now that does mean it does represent brain drain, and we can talk about brain drain.
Yes.
That is a thing that many countries in the world suffer from, but Canada, to be honest, has benefited from that. Because we offer in many cases better opportunities for professionals in different parts of the world. It means that we've been among the most competitive countries in attracting top talent, and that is reflected, I think, in the quality of the education system that we offer.
So, I really respect what you have just said, and which the most important thing is the diversity and the accepting of the government and the people of the diversified population. You can have, if you're living now in Montreal, you'll have an Indian or an American or an African or an Arab or a Middle Eastern neighbor, and you are living normally without any discrimination feelings. And I felt that when I was in Canada for a short time. I was having a paper presentation in one of the conferences in Montreal back in 2008, and I felt that there is no fear of discrimination, whether you are white or black or brown or whatever the color of your skin is. There is a sort of an acceptance of that, and this is really very tough to imagine in the Western world. How was that possible?
How is that possible? That's an interesting question. I mean, I think, we do feel that we have one of the most successful models of diversity and integration, compared to our neighbors to the south and compared to some of the European countries as well. We have a saying that, diversity is a fact of life, but integration is a choice. And I think the fact that Canada is itself a country of immigrants, the fact that the two dominant cultures historically in Canada, which are the English and the French, came as immigrants to a continent that was populated by native people. We understand that we ourselves were all immigrants. Unless you're a First Nation Canadian, you cannot say that you were always in Canada. You always came from somewhere else. And so that's forced us to acknowledge the importance of diversity and being welcoming. And also politically, because we are again, population-wise, a small country on a very big continent next to a very powerful neighbor. We can only grow our population and our talent base by being welcoming and by attracting people from all over the world. And so I think that's why we've had what we consider a very successful model.
Just we're going to touch you brought the native population. In the beginning, they suffered, and suffrage was sometimes intentional by the immigrants coming from the West at that time, from Europe or whatever. But I think Canada has paid a lot of respect and decent apology to the native people. How far there has been reconciliation with the native people?
It's come a long way, especially in the last 10 years. When our government, the current government, was elected in 2015, they came to power with an agenda that included, genuine reconciliation with native peoples. And our prime minister at the time, started from a position of modesty. He conveyed formal apologies to the native people for all of the historic, crimes that were committed against them. And so it's become normal in Canada to talk in terms of reconciliation and acknowledging the wrongs that were inflicted on our native people. But it's not just about acknowledging the difficult history. We're also focused on repairing these errors and creating a better future for our native population. And so that is seen in a lot of the services that are provided to them. So there are specialized ministries of government that are entirely consumed with providing higher quality services to this native population, especially those that live in remote areas. And that's the problem for many of them. They live away from large population centers. It's more difficult to get medical service, to get clean water.
Just going to ask,
exactly. Yes. And so I would say we spend quite a lot of money. We invest a lot as a government in providing quality services in these more remote areas. And we've also devolved a lot of authority to local self-government. So Indian bands, native bands, do quite a lot of local self-administration, and they benefit from a certain number of exceptions to Canadian law around taxation and things like that. Rules around how they can hunt and fish and grow livestock and so on. A lot of those authorities are devolved to these bands so that they can govern themselves more competently than the federal government can.
Well, this is really very interesting. Since we are talking about immigrants and how it is not a brain drain, it's open doors for people who can really integrate and accept, and at the same time being accepted. Let's talk about something which is related to my profession. A lot of physicians who have traveled to Canada, and I raised this subject with your predecessor, the dear friend Ambassador Louise. There was a problem with accreditation of the qualifications, and you are short of physicians, and yet the physicians who are coming from abroad face a lot of problems until their degrees are identified and accepted. Is there a way to solve this problem? Because these people are Canadians. I mean, they have changed they have traveled, they have come, and the engineers are accepted, the teachers and accountants, but still you have this gap with the physicians. I'm sorry to raise it, but I know that you know this problem, and hopefully you will try to solve it once in a while, right?
It's a real problem, and it's a live issue in Canada.
Yes.
Like, Canadians are discussing this. It's being discussed in the media, in Parliament.
You will solve a lot of medical waiting lists, right?
Well, you're absolutely right in saying that we have a shortage of doctors.
Yes.
And yet we have many trained medical professionals who've come to Canada from other parts of the world.
Yes.
Now, I think we have a legitimate interest in making sure that the qualifications that these people acquired,
of course,
overseas meet the standards that Canadians expect from doctors who've been trained in Canada. But you're right. I mean, this medicine is a regulated profession. And it's not regulated by government so much as by the medical field itself, right? The College of Physicians and so on. So I think there's a lot that could be done to accelerate the recognition of credentials, so that we can more quickly allow people with strong backgrounds, strong training overseas, to start practicing medicine in Canada. But I don't have a solution to that. But it's a live issue, and again,
it's good that the government now is well oriented with this problem, because I know a lot of people really who are overqualified, and then sometimes they ended up by working in as clerical jobs or even taxi drivers or whatever.
Exactly.
I didn't go there. No, don't. No worries. So when we talk about Canada, we remember that the perception of sports in Canada is different than the U.S. What are the popular sports in Canada? It's not American football, right?
It's not American football.
But it's hockey, right?
It is hockey, yeah. Yes. So our official national sport actually is lacrosse, which is one of the sports that was introduced to most Canadians by our native people, right? It was practiced as a sport even before immigration to North America. But the most popular sport by far is hockey, or
ice hockey.
I have to say ice hockey. For us in Canada, there's only one type of hockey, and we call it hockey because it's ice hockey.
Because Egypt in the good old times, maybe in the 40s or 50s, they had a very strong hockey team, but not anymore, because there are, of course, people who practice hockey, ground hockey,
field hockey,
but not that much popular as it was in the 50s and the 40s.
Well, it's funny because when I was posted to Pakistan, you mentioned I served there as a diplomat. We used to play hockey, but it was a mixed team. We had Canadians and we had Pakistanis, and of course the Pakistanis would play in what we considered a very weird way, because of course they were used to, hunching down to the ground because they're used to playing, with a ball with a very different stick.
Yes.
So it's a very different
sport.
Very
British.
It is very British, yeah. But in Canada, it's ice hockey, and it's, I think it's the most exciting sport. It's extremely fast. It's extremely violent. And so we grow up, quite tough as Canadians. You have to, because if you play hockey as a child.
The same toughness like the American football, right?
I would say so. Yes. I would say so, yeah.
And there are a lot of, your neighbors have a lot of teams, of strong ice hockey teams, right?
They do, yeah. I mean, hockey has become more and more popular in the United States.
Especially in the northern states, right? More or less.
Yes, although there are, many more teams now in southern United States, which is Texas and Florida, and they've won the last 2 championships, in Florida. So it's a bit hard for a traditional Canadian like me to accept that hockey is this strong in the southern U.S., but that's the reality. Yeah.
So a question which I believe is really of great interest, and you as a great reader and avid reader will answer this, please. The Canadian literature has been flourishing, and you've had recently Nobel Prize laureates coming as well from Canada. Mm-hmm. Tell us about how literature is amalgamated in the Canadian backgrounds, because when you give one of the classical teachings about the Nobel laureate in literature is that the literature has to be extremely local but easily becoming universal. Mm-hmm. And that's how Naguib Mahfouz, because of his locality, was matching. You cannot put the name David, for example, or George or whatever on the name of the Sayyid Abdul Gawad. It makes it very difficult to understand. But the human touch in it made it approachable. So it's local, but humanly wise, it is universal. Mm-hmm. How was that possible as well? How the environment affected the Canadian Nobel laureates?
So we have 2 different literary traditions in Canada. Of course, one from Quebec, which is my home province.
That's
and
the French.
It's in French, yes, very much. And my native tongue actually.
Mais c'est pas facile de parler en français, n'est-ce pas?
Mais écoutez, pour moi c'est facile parce que c'est ma langue maternelle. But for Canadians who have to learn French, no, they do find it challenging. But so we have the French tradition and we have the English Canadian tradition. But I would say both are, very much reflective of the Canadian reality, which is that of a large country that still has sort of a pioneer spirit. So much of our literature has to do with how to integrate with the environment around you. Things like solitude and estrangement, and how to acclimatize to a new environment. Again, because we're still a relatively young country, we are a country of immigrants, and so all of us, our parents, our forefathers, had to settle in new environments regularly. So a lot of our literature is sort of slow moving, and it's about how to acclimatize to unfamiliar environments, how to deal with the challenges of distance in time, distance in space.
Well, this really makes it very interesting. So from locality, it becomes universal because it's dealing with the human emotions and response to solitude or to different environment than the usual environment of the rest of the world. Now, since we are bringing up the subject of the environment, I think Canada has tried very successfully to make the environment much cleaner. I know that Canada has one of the largest reservoirs of the superficial petroleum, if we may use the expression, or fossil fuel, and it's refusing up till now to involve itself in excavations, because this would be very bad to the environment. And in the beginning, the reason was, people would say, because it's very expensive. But now, with the price of the gas getting higher, the investment in this special fossil fuel is worthwhile economically. But still, you're not trying to work on it, not to spoil the environment. How far is Canada doing in the environment protection, sir?
It's a difficult issue for us. So, I mean, our government has been committed to carbon emission reduction. We're committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. So it remains a priority for us. And you're right, it has resulted in us not developing some of our petrochemical resources as much as we could have. There's a lot of domestic opposition, for example, to developing pipelines so that we can bring our hydrocarbons to market. But at the same time, there's also voices in Canada who look around and they see an environment where economic security is being threatened. We are potentially an economic and energy superpower, but we haven't developed the infrastructure to do that. And so there's more and more people in Canada who say, look, we need to find a balance between our commitments to protect the environment while also developing our most important natural resources, which are our hydrocarbons. If we're going to remain an independent country, we need to have the ability to export these resources to more than just the United States, for example. So there's more and more support for the idea now of building pipelines to bring oil and gas from central Canada to the coast so that it can be exported internationally. But again, it's a controversial issue because many Canadians say, yeah, but you can't do that and meet your carbon reduction targets.
This is very interesting. Sir, the time is flying, because now we're going to a very dear part, I think, to you and to me, which is to talk about Egyptian-Canadian relations, which is a very unique, friendly relation that has been there for many years. We'll talk about history, we'll talk about the present, and definitely we'll talk about the future. So stay tuned with us. We are having His Excellency Ambassador Ulric Shannon, the Ambassador of Canada in Egypt, and consuming some of his valuable time in Cairo. Stay tuned with us, and we're coming right after the break. We're still listening to the World of Info. Today we are having a very special guest, His Excellency Ambassador Ulric Shannon, the Ambassador of Canada to Egypt, and definitely we have to talk about Egyptian-Canadian relations. How long have you been? Canada has had an embassy in Egypt, I think many years, maybe since
the 1950s. So we celebrated 70 years of diplomatic relations last year.
So Ambassador Norman was the first one?
If he wasn't the first one, he was one of the very first.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a very special and a very interesting relation, which went into definitely of great mutual respect between both countries. And we have to tell our listeners about a very distinguished ambassador, Ambassador Norman, who is considered to be a role model of a lot of Canadian ambassadors in Egypt. And even they have a conference room in the embassy that carries his name. Ambassador Norman is a distinguished, highly educated gentleman who had his education in Cambridge, and therefore he met a lot of Kim Phillips and things like that, and therefore he was thought that he was involved in communism, which was never the fact. On the contrary, he was born to a missionary couple in Japan, and who lived in Japan for some time. He has a role as a great distinguished diplomat, especially in 1956 in Egypt. He served very much as a liaison officer between himself and the secretary or the minister Pearson, who later on became the prime minister, who helped to make the blue hats or the blue caps join in normalizing and returning of Sinai to the control of Egypt. And he received the Nobel Prize for that. And unfortunately, Ambassador Norman died in Egypt in very dramatic things. And he had a lot of great respect from President Nasser then. And he ordered a very official funeral that took his body to the airport, where he was buried in Rome later on. So very distinguished relation. The fact that Canada has helped in negotiating a peace, even though it was a temporary peace, but it was an acceptable peace of the brave, if we use the expression, and Canada has been a friend of Egypt since. And there are a lot of Egyptians who traveled. That's why in the 60s and the 70s to have higher education. Tell us, I mean, you can take it from there. Tell us about how far Egyptian-Canadian relations in the past, in short, has seen a lot of shining stars, if we use the expression.
So that's a great introduction. So you're absolutely right. Next year we'll be celebrating the 70th anniversary of UNEF, the UN Emergency Force, which was deployed to Egypt in 1956, and it was the first ever UN peacekeeping mission. So peacekeeping was born with that first mission, and as you said, it was the brainchild very much of Lester Pearson, our foreign minister at the time, and of Herbert Norman, our ambassador at the time. They helped create this mission. As a result, our foreign minister Lester Pearson won the Nobel Peace Prize, and to this day that Peace Prize is present in the lobby of our foreign ministry building in Ottawa. So and
the airport is named after him.
And the airport in Ottawa is named after him. In Toronto is named after him. And so every Canadian diplomat, knows this rich history. So for me, it's a particular honor to be, an ambassador now in the footsteps of Herbert Norman. And so that marked the start of a relationship that's remained very strong, through the 7 years. And interestingly, we still today have Canadian peacekeepers in Sinai. They're serving in the multinational force, which is created after the Egypt-Israel peace agreement.
Camp David Accords.
Correct, in 1978. And we've had Canadians serving in that mission since 1985. So exactly 40 years, continuously. So we've always had Canadian peacekeepers present in Egypt almost continuously. And as a result, we have what I consider, a very strong strategic political relationship with Egypt. We rely a lot on Egypt for advice in navigating this region. Currently, unfortunately, Egypt is surrounded by conflict, as we know, in Libya and Sudan and Palestine. Egypt has managed to remain stable, and therefore it's an important partner for us in talking about the region and how we can help bring stability and peace to the region. So we really value not only Egypt's leadership in regional diplomacy, but in the dialogue that we have. And again, it's a different relationship for us. Obviously, Egypt has a close strategic relationship with the United States, with Europe, with Russia and China. So we don't necessarily occupy that much space in I think in Egypt's strategic thinking, but for us it's an important relationship, and we really value Egypt's advice. And on the basis of that, we've been able to develop other parts of the relationship, and we can talk about the economy, trade, and so on.
I mean, for political statements, of course, I know that whoever is a prime minister of Canada has a very special relation with the President Sisi, whether the current Prime Minister, who recently has been appointed after the elections, or the Prime Minister, his predecessor. Definitely there is a very strong understanding and mutual respect between both leadership in this field because we agree on a lot of things, whether this is environment, whether this is the stability of the Middle East. You as a distinguished ambassador who served in turmoil land, whether this was in Palestine or Iraq, definitely rings a lot of bells of cooperation and friendship, right, sir?
Absolutely, yeah. As I said, it's we look for the peacemakers, right? We look for countries that are playing a constructive role in and around these different conflict zones, and Egypt is it's simply a partner that you can't do without, and we care a lot about the situation in the Middle East. We have large communities in Canada, from the Arab world, from the Muslim world. There's a lot of attention paid to the situation next door in Gaza and elsewhere. Even when I was in Iraq, there was a lot of attention and a lot of investment by Canada to help stabilize the situation there. And again, many Canadians still believe in that peacekeeping tradition that started with Lester Pearson here in Egypt. And so we're always looking for ways to be helpful and to bring peace and stability to the region. And again, Egypt is always there, and it has important advice and counsel to provide us. And so we always seek out Egypt's views on what is happening in the region.
And of course, you have seen some improvement, a great improvement in the infrastructure in Egypt lately. So how far could there be an investment or further investments of Canadian business people or Canadian government in Egypt, and how far is this relation going on?
So the potential is very, very strong, but I would say the current state of the commercial relationship is nowhere near as big as it should be, given the size of Egypt, given the size of Canada, given the highly advanced sectors that we have in Canada, and the very strong demand coming from Egypt for products, for services, for investment, for knowledge transfer, and so on. I think one of the challenges is distance. We have a much closer European market next door, and so the Europeans are often more competitive than we are. But just because they're closer, they have a longer history in this market. They have a deeper knowledge base, and transportation is much more competitive, much cheaper. So we have to overcome some of these obstacles. And I would say, what Egypt has to offer as an investment partner, as an exporter, is not necessarily well known in Canada. And so I think there's not a high enough degree of familiarity. We know the U.S. market very well in Canada. As you know, 75% of our exports go there. And our business community in Canada aren't as historically as interested and as risk-taking when it comes to more expeditionary markets.
So how far are you going to do? I know as a current ambassador, one of the important tasks that you are definitely interested in is increasing the mutual investment, whether this is Egyptian investment in Canada or Canadian investment in Egypt. Already Egypt has invested a lot with a lot of scientists and a lot of expats who are living now in Canada, building in a very peaceful community. We'll talk about later in the show about how Egyptians are faring as a very distinguished population over there, but in a community. But tell us about the Canadian investment that is currently in. What type of investment are there? Are there any Canadian investments here?
Yes, there are. They tend to be in, I would say, first of all, education. So there's something like 20,000 Egyptians here in Egypt who are benefiting from a Canadian learning curriculum, whether that's in school, in a college, or in a university.
That's the Canadian University, Al-Ahram, Canadian University, and other universities.
And others, exactly. So there's a number of them. And some are, more closely linked with curricula in Canada, and some are less closely linked. But the point is, I think there's a lot of demand in the market here for Canadian educational products. And so we're having more and more success developing partnerships between, again, Canadian colleges, universities, with partner institutions here in Egypt that can then deliver the Canadian curriculum, offer the Canadian degree. So this is an area where there's been a lot of progress in recent years. And again, I think we have a strong brand in education that sells itself. So that's one sector. Mining is another sector. So we have several Canadian mining companies. Canada's the world leader in mining, along with Australia. We tend to be number one and number two. And we do mining differently in Canada. We pride ourselves on doing ethical mining, which is to say responsible in terms of the environment, labor rights, anti-corruption, things like that. And so that's the model that we tend to operate.
So you are interested in mining in what? In coke or in carbon or in
gold? Mostly gold. Other minerals, yeah. But right now the most developed sector of mining in Egypt is gold.
Yes.
And again, obviously many countries are involved in mining. We tend to do mining, our companies tend to do mining in a very responsible way. So I think that's attractive. We need to maintain social license for mining. It's not a popular sector. Local populations often have objections to some of the environmental side effects of mining. So I think the way that Canadian mining companies do business is more responsible in terms of things like the environment and labor rights. So that's a sector that we're developing as well. And there's a lot of interest in infrastructure, energy. Clean energy again is a area of specialization for Canada. So I think there's a lot of demand for that. What we need to do though, as an embassy here, is simply to build that matchmaking, right? To match the Canadian capability with what the Egyptian market needs, and to make sure that the commercial side of it makes sense, right? And there's no hiding the fact that Egypt's gone through some difficulties in recent years around the stability of the currency, for example. Obviously, there was a lot of pressure on the Egyptian currency, a lot of controls around foreign capital that made a lot of foreign investors wary of the Egyptian market. Now I think we're over the worst of it. We have a cabinet here in Egypt that's very business friendly, that really sees things from the perspective of foreign investors and is creating a lot of reforms that will help make Egypt more attractive to investors. So that's part of what I'm focusing on, in partnership with the Egyptian Embassy in Canada and their consulate in Montreal. We have a good relationship, and we're both trying to get the business communities in both countries to be more familiar with each other.
And does Egypt export anything to Canada?
Of course, yeah. It exports textiles, food products, different iron ores, things like that. It's not just one thing. It's a very diverse array of products that are exported to Canada. Again, the same problem applies. It's very far, right? So shipping costs are high. So it's not always the most competitive market for Egyptian products. We also don't have a free trade agreement, which creates its own challenges. So again, I think the Egyptian embassy team in Canada are having more and more success in bringing Egyptian products to market. It's helpful that we are looking to diversify our own supply chains. The fact that unfortunately we're in a bit of a trade dispute with our biggest neighbor next door.
Yes.
It means that right now we're focusing on importing oranges not from Florida, right? And I mean that's a tangible example. I mean
Yes.
Egypt is now exporting oranges to Canada because we're looking at different sources now for some of our produce and other products. So there's a real opportunity for Egypt there.
Yes. How about tourism?
Tourism is...
I know, I mean, the pyramids and Egypt is selling itself even for Canada, because all the Canadian students, or the Canadians per se, the 37 millions of them have studied Egypt in their curriculum, right?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, Egypt is, of course, it's a major tourism destination for many countries. And so we have, quite a lot of interest by Canadians, both Egyptian Canadians and non-Egyptian Canadians.
Especially that the airlines are going now maybe 2 or 3 flights per week.
6 days a week,
6 days
yes,
now.
on Egypt Air to Toronto. We used to have a direct flight from Cairo to Montreal on Air Canada. That disappeared during, again, the economic troubles of the last few years, but we hope it'll come back next year. So we are working on trying to facilitate movement between the two countries. So whether that's by developing more options in terms of airlines,
especially with the infrastructure that has been developed, so the people who would like beach tourism will have a chance on 1-day trip to see Luxor and Aswan, or to see Cairo in a very well paved road. So I think this, and cheaper than going in even by internal flights, right?
Of course.
So
of course. Well, the challenge always is what not to do in Egypt, right? So my own father, for example, inshallah, will visit in November, and we're discussing right now. Well, what do you want to do? Because there's everything.
The
obviously,
itinerary is perfect.
Yeah. Well, and, obviously you do Cairo, you do the pyramids, you do the new museum, and all of the other great museums. But then you have to leave Cairo. So what do you do? Do you do Alexandria? Do you do the White Desert? Do you do Siwa? Do you do the Red Sea Coast? Do you do Sahel?
He has to stay for some time.
Well, you either have to stay for much longer, or you have to make a difficult choice, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
I think there's something in Egypt for everyone. Whatever your hobbies are, you'll find something interesting to do here.
So you've been to the Grand Museum or not yet?
I have multiple times. Yes,
Yes.
We've had many guests, both friends and also government visitors from Canada. I'm looking forward to the grand opening.
Yes, it's stunning.
In November. It's a beautiful museum.
Yes.
It's and again, I remember 20 years ago, as you mentioned, I was here. I worked here and lived here for 2 years, and back then there was only Tahrir. Right,
Yes.
Tahrir Museum was the one museum,
And it's really one of the best. I mean, the Tahrir Museum is, in spite of being old and crammed with a lot of things, but definitely it's a showcase of the world. It's a showcase of the history. It's beautiful.
It's an amazing.
And I'm happy that it's going to stay there. So it's,
Absolutely. But I think what they've managed to do now with the GEM, the Grand Egyptian Museum, is make the visitor experience so much more pleasant, right? I mean, it's not as crowded as Tahrir. Things are much better explained. So I think they're able to exploit the value of each one of these wonders much more successfully than Tahrir. But I'm also a big fan of the Civilization Museum,
yes.
Which is an astonishing
Namek is
museum.
beautiful, yes. And
Absolutely.
the idea of going in a very short period of time, half an hour, to go through a museum that takes you from the pre-dynastic period till Cairo today or Egypt today is just fascinating in one showcase. And besides, of course, the Hall of the Mummy makes an experience for people who are just shooting for half an hour or half a day visit to Egypt. That would be quite enough.
And I think the strategy of having at least 3 major landmark museums. It's a great way to sort of spread out the tourism a little bit, keep each place welcoming and spacious, and really exploit, again, this interest from visitors.
We cannot forget the Islamic Museum and the Coptic Museum.
Absolutely.
So your father has to stay in Cairo area for at least 7 days. Come on, give him a chance.
Oh, he'll do at least that. Yes. But then
7 days in Cairo.
7 days in Cairo. But then what do you help me choose? Between,
Alexandria has to go to the Greco-Roman. Come on.
I agree, but then he also has to go to Siwa.
Yes, of course, he has to see what Alexander the Great did there.
Exactly.
Well, it's really very interesting, and this will take us to a very dear story, and this is the Egyptians in Canada. It's a success story. The Egyptians are an integrated community. Egyptians there are more or less mostly white collars, and they are doing a good job with perhaps I think one of the least communities that cause any trouble for the government or for the law, or their respect and their admiration of the country, of their new adopted country, gives them the caliber of being really very distinguished. Tell us about the Egyptians in Canada, please.
So I think officially, according to our census, there's about 105,000 Canadians of Egyptian origin, but the real number is much higher because our census doesn't force you to identify as Egyptian Canadian, and many will just tick the box that says Canadian. My colleague Ahmed Hafiz, the ambassador of Egypt in Canada, thinks that the number is much higher, like closer to 500,000.
Really?
Yeah. So then, and it's it's an old community. Like there's been waves of immigration throughout the 20th century.
From the 60s maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Probably, people who went there to have higher education, PhDs or masters, and stayed there, right?
That's the typical story, right? Is somebody who went as a student and who stayed, and then who brought up their kids in Canada. And again, the next generation, the second generation, the third generation, some of them keep their sort of identity as Egyptians strongly, and others don't, right? Which is why, again, the census doesn't give us the full number.
Yes.
And so you're right. It's largely a class of professionals. It's people who went to Canada to build themselves. And so many are...
We have a lot of ministers. Some of them came back and became ministers and prime ministers in Egypt.
I know. Well, not all of them necessarily had Canadian citizenship. Some just studied in Canada, and they had degrees, and they came back. In fact, one of the things that I would like to do in the time I have in Egypt is to somehow build a network of Canadian graduates in Egypt. Right?
Yes.
So people who studied in Canada and came back and are building themselves.
The British Council is having such a alumni group, and so is the French Center. There's the Culture French Center here in Egypt. I think you really need to do that, because there are a lot of people who have had their education, and to my knowledge and to my information, they had a very distinguished education.
Exactly, and most of them are actually brand ambassadors for Canada because they speak of us very well.
Yes.
And it's one thing for me to promote my country because that's what everyone expects an ambassador will do. But when you have other people, Egyptians, speaking well of us, that has so much more power as a marketing tool for us.
This makes it very special, and I think a university like McGill, I've been there, I've seen the university. It's an open door university. There are no walls, there are no gates, and it was really a very distinguished afternoon visit in Montreal. Excuse me. And tell us about McGill, because it has a very special place in the hearts of Egyptians. A lot of Egyptians went to study in McGill, which makes a huge number of them. If you calculate the census, you'll find why McGill is special.
I'm from Montreal. I was born there, so I grew up in Montreal. My father went to McGill. So I learned about it through him and his experience. He was there in the 1960s when the hippie culture was the flower power exactly. So he had very.
So you even have a degree from McGill, right? But yes,
I do. I did my undergraduate there, and McGill is right downtown, right? It's central in Montreal.
It's very interesting,
but it's a large green space in the heart of a very busy city, and so I think what people find attractive about it is it's in the middle of what we consider one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world.
Montreal, yes,
but the space itself is just beautiful and welcoming.
Mm-hmm. And so there are a lot of Egyptians who have this degree from there, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I meet them all the time, and there's enough to create a strong alumni group.
Yes. So in the future, if you ever form this private club. I mean, it's not a private club per se, but I mean private club of Canadian educated graduates. What do you think the role will be of this private club or this distinguished club, if I use the expression?
Well, I think what I'd love to do is to again strengthen, particularly the trade ties between Canada and Egypt. And we talked about the very successful Egyptians who went to Canada and settled there and became accomplished professionals. But most of them are not necessarily business people. They're not necessarily involved in promoting trade, and if they are, like most Canadian business people, they'll be looking at the U.S. market first, and then maybe Europe. What's missing, and Ambassador Hoff is in Ottawa, and I agree on this, is that binational community is not as active as it could be in promoting bilateral trade between Canada and Egypt. And so I think what I'd like to do with the Canadian population in Egypt and those who, again, only know Canada from past experience there, is to get them more interested in promoting bilateral exchanges. And that's commercial, but it's also cultural exchange as well.
So if we talk about things that makes Canada more attractive for Egyptians to go there, or even, anyone to immigrate, are two things. In spite of the weather, which is very harsh.
Yes.
We have to accept that. I've been to Montreal. I'm biased because I've been there in August, September, so the weather was beautiful.
Absolutely.
So this was, but then I found out the reason. I started feeling something was mysterious. Is that there is an underground Montreal?
Yes.
Right.
An underground city.
Underground city, because nobody can go in the storms, or in December and January. It's terribly cold. But what makes people accept to live in such harsh conditions and become acclimatized to it is two things. And this is what we want to finish our program with, which is the healthcare and education. Mm-hmm. The healthcare is every Canadian is fully insured health-wise. And this makes a big difference between you and your southern great neighbors, because this is one of the biggest problems of the United States, is how to give a decent free health care service for the 300 million Americans there. And you are able to present that. I know that there's no comparison between the size of both populations, but to include in this huge safety nest, all the Canadians there, this makes it a very special. How was that possible? It's a very difficult task. It's mission impossible.
It is difficult. And, I wouldn't say that our model is perfect.
Because there's a very big, long waiting list for
some services.
Yes, for some services.
That's always the problem when you have, an offer of free healthcare is the demand is always going to exceed the supply. And it's frankly, it's very expensive. It's a large part of our budget in Canada. It's also complicated because health is managed by the provinces, not by the federal government. So it's one of the most one of the biggest policy issues that we argue about in Canada is finding that right middle ground between providing coverage to everyone while keeping it affordable for the state. And so how you manage supply, how you manage wait lists and things like that is it's a very live issue. It's what most of our parliament is talking about most of the time. But we have again a strong tradition that goes back to the 1940s of the idea that there's a safety net for everyone, that we cannot leave anybody behind. And I don't know if that's part of the European part of our culture, Quebec having been a French colony initially. But we have evolved very differently from the United States on some of those issues. The issues around our social values, around who is protected, who the state is there to serve, versus leaving it to the private sector to deal with.
I know that you have a very good system, is that you are sometimes, the National Health Service is hiring private contractors to give a service. So you can go for a physician and tell him, I'm going to supply you with this amount of money every year. You get your employees, you get your assistants, and you are going to present a free service to this community. And I think this is a very interesting way to reduce the expenses and to reduce the headache, if we use the expression.
Yes.
Then the job will be the job of observing instead of doing the job, which is really very logical. I have a couple of friends who are acting as subcontractors for the government, for the NHS.
Right. The downside is, for example, we don't pay our doctors as much as they deserve to be paid.
Yes.
And so we lose many of our doctors who we train. Many will say, well, now that I've gotten my qualifications in Canada, I can move to the United States and practice private medicine for a lot more money. And this gets back to the first question you asked me about how we accredit, immigrants with medical skills, right? I mean, this is one of the biggest issues that we're fighting with right now, is how to keep our capacity to provide health services, and again, not just in the major cities, but in the more remote areas.
The second point is, which makes people live there because of attracting Canada as being very attractive to them, is education. We talked about higher school education, which is all over the world in developed nations is supplied for free in a good quality, but to have a high degree or university degrees available for everyone in such a cheap price. I mean, it could be $1,000 or something tuition fees every year.
I think it's gone up since I did my undergraduate, but yeah, it's still affordable for
most of the people, right?
Yes.
Or even they can take small loans, not huge loans like that in the United States.
That's what I did.
How was that possible?
Again, I think it's the same traditions, right? We have traditions of having a strong social safety net. There's a sense that education is a right. Everyone is entitled to it. What I would say too is, we don't force everyone to go to university. We don't engage in credentialism in the sense that you can't get a quality job, a well-paying job, unless you have a university degree. We have a very strong, vocational training tradition as well. And frankly, you can make more money in Canada now as a technician than you can as a university graduate. And so more and more people are looking to acquire certifications in different trades. And there's no sense that that's less of an achievement than having a university degree. So I think we're finding the right balance. We don't have too many people who are coming out of university with credentials that they can't use in the labor market.
So this is really very very interesting how education. So the second and these 2 points are really attracting immigrants from all over the world, which also breaks the taboo that you have just mentioned. It's they are not going to have the credential. It's not that easy to become a millionaire, but you're going to have a more or less a decent life. This is the motto, right?
We tend to have lower income inequality extremes than many countries. That is true. So we don't have the billionaire class that, again, the United States have. We don't have an Elon Musk, although he lived in Canada.
Yes, that's what I was just going to say.
And acquired citizenship. But we also have, a fairly robust social safety net. So we don't have extreme poverty in Canada either, except, again, in some of those First Nations communities that have been traditionally underserved, which is why we're focusing so much on improving the level of service to those communities.
Before we leave, we are going to discuss an important point, which is, thank God you've been here maybe now for 6 or 7 months.
Almost a year.
Almost a year.
Yes,
time is flying.
Exactly.
So another 3 years to go, hopefully.
Another 2 years to go.
It's only 3 years.
Unfortunately.
That's too unfortunate.
It is.
So, what are your expectations and aspirations for these 2 years as regards the Canadian-Egyptian relations? What will be your first target to accomplish?
So I think we've got positive momentum in the relationship right now. We went through a rough patch with on some of the visa issues. Right, there were some difficulties, and Egypt for a while had suspended visas on arrival for Canadians. Yeah. Well, alhamdulillah, we were able to fix that.
Alhamdulillah, you fixed that.
We did. We fixed that.
We're not going to raise it
as of December. But I think there's an interest on both sides to facilitate movement. We need to have just more exchanges, more cultural exchanges, commercial exchanges. So the relationship right now is very positive. Our new Prime Minister and President Sisi spoke by phone at the end of June. Our foreign ministers speak regularly. There's a lot of interest in doing more in the relationship. So I think my challenge for the next 2 years is to try to develop that good intent, that interest that exists on both sides, at a time when, frankly, we're very distracted in Canada. We're very focused right now on our relationship with the United States. we need to find a new trade partnership that works for both sides, and that is taking up a lot of time and attention from our political leadership. There's not a lot of time to focus on other parts of the world. So keeping Egypt front and center in the minds of decision makers in Canada, and trying to find those opportunities that we can develop quickly to build out that relationship. That's my challenge for the next 2 years.
Well, wishing you great and best luck, and I'm sure that there's nobody more seasoned like you as a seasoned diplomat to do this job with your language skills, at least like Arabic, English, French, and even Turkish. You are the Renaissance man, sir.
You're too kind.
Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate the visit of His Excellency Ambassador Ulric Shannon, the Ambassador of Canada to Egypt, and definitely it was really a great chance. Would you promise to come again, please?
Absolutely.
So with this, we come to with this beautiful promise from His Excellency the Ambassador. We promise to come back next week, same time, same station in Radio Cairo, World of Info. My name is Dr. Amr Mabrouk. Manal Zakaria was on control today, and she was doing a great job. And hopefully we'll see you at the same time, same station. Always stay tuned to Radio Cairo.